I wiped table number 6 for the third time that evening. The sharp scent of vinegar from the cleaning solution still clinging inside my nose. And the round clock hanging above the kitchen door pointed to 9:47 at night as Forest Hill Diner moved through what Sophie liked to call a dead shift. One of those rare November nights when the regulars seem to evaporate into the cold air, leaving only 4 occupied tables in a room big enough for 40 people. "You are going to scrub a hole right through that table," Sophie said as she set the coffee pot on the counter, her other hand gripping her phone. A few loose strands of blonde hair slipping from her messy bun and falling around her face. "Seriously, Claire, it is clean. It has been clean since the second time you wiped it, never mind the third." I placed the rag down, realizing that my hands were trembling. I had been working here for 2 years, yet I still could not stay calm on nights as slow as this because the silence opened a door in my mind just wide enough for old memories to slip back in. Memories I had been running from for 2 years. "Sorry, I am just a little restless," I murmured. Sophie glanced at me over the rim of her round glasses. "You are always restless." I smiled faintly without arguing because she was right. But it wasn't just restlessness. It was an old instinct, the kind you learn growing up on the South Side, the kind I'd spent 2 years trying to bury under the smell of vinegar and diner coffee. The silence just let it breathe. I was never truly still, especially when things grew too quiet. The diner stayed open as usual, the warm lights washing over the red booths with their frayed corners, a retired couple sharing apple pie near the window, 2 construction workers laughing softly in the far corner, and the rest of the room empty while mist began to cling to the glass, forming blurred, ghost-like streaks. I returned to the beverage station, filling the coffee pot while Sophie scrolled through meaningless entertainment news, and a pair of headlights flashed across the front windows. I barely glanced up before going back to my work. But a few seconds later, the chime above the door rang and both of us lifted our heads. 3 men walked in. I did not need to look closely to know they did not belong here. Dark tailored suits, polished shoes, and eyes that swept across the entire room in a single calculated pass. The man in the center was tall with cropped hair, and an expression carved from stone. Yet something heavy and almost pressed down flickered beneath his gray eyes. He scanned the diner once, then his gaze locked on me, and a cold shiver moved down my spine. I straightened, picked up the menus, and stepped toward them, forcing my voice to stay steady and welcoming. "Good evening. Where would you like to sit?" They chose the booth near the end of the row next to the window where no one ever sat. I handed each of them a menu, but I could still feel the central man's gaze following me, unwavering. I turned away, moving quickly back toward the counter to get their water. And as I pivoted, my hands trembled enough that the chain around my neck slipped. The small silver locket tumbling to the floor with a soft sound. I froze, bending down to grab it, but a hand reached it first. It was him, the man with the cold carved face and the dangerous eyes. He held the locket, flipped it open gently, and everything around us seemed to halt. His expression changed, his eyes widening and then darkening as though something had broken straight through that iron exterior. "This is my brother," he said, his voice low and measured, almost disbelieving. I went still, unable to breathe as the locket lay open in his palm, revealing the tiny photograph I had hidden for 2 years of a young man with a soft smile and gentle eyes. Michael, the man who had vanished from my life without a word, and now his name rose uninvited from the mouth of a stranger. But if that young man was his sibling, then who was Michael really? And why had I never known the truth? If the story of Ethan and that locket made your heart skip a beat, please subscribe to our channel, hit like, and share this video so we can keep bringing you moving and mysterious stories every day. And tell me where you are watching from, your city or your country, so I can see how far Claire's journey has traveled in this wide world. The narrator's voice gently urged, fading back into the quiet hum of the diner as I stared at the locket, still resting in the stranger's hand. My heart pounded so fiercely it felt ready to break through my ribs. And he continued to stare at the small photograph as if he were looking at a ghost of his own. The room blurred around me, the clatter of dishes and silverware disappearing as though someone had turned down the volume on reality. I swallowed hard, my feet rooted to the floor. "What? What did you say?" The words slipped out of me in a whisper I could barely hear. He lifted his head, his gaze cutting straight through me, not angry, not confused, but chilled with a stunned disbelief. "The man in the photograph. How long have you known him?" I could not answer immediately. My mind was roaring with questions I did not yet have the courage to face. I reached out to take the locket back, but he did not release it. The men beside him watched me with razor-sharp attention, one of them brushing a hand near his waistband where a weapon was concealed, his eyes sweeping the diner as though calculating exits. He was my boyfriend," I whispered hoarsely. "We were together for more than a year. Then one day, he disappeared. No note, no trace." My answer did not ease him. Instead, his expression darkened, his grip tightening around the locket until his knuckles turned white. "His name." I hesitated. Part of me wanted to shout, to claim him, to say he was mine. The past I had fought to bury, but another part understood that whatever was happening here was far bigger than heartbreak. "Michael," I breathed. "Michael Grayson." His eyes closed for a brief moment, as if accepting a truth he had not wanted to face. And when he opened them, he placed the locket back into my hand, but did not step away. Instead, he signaled for the other 2 men to rise. One of them tossed a few folded bills onto the table. "You are coming with me," he said, his voice holding no room for questions. "I cannot," I replied instinctively, stepping back. "I am working." "Not anymore," he said as he turned and walked toward the door. One of his companions stepped beside me, his voice low and firm. "You should go. Not for him, for yourself." I looked toward Sophie, who had been frozen this whole time, terror shining in her eyes as she gave me the smallest of nods, urging me to follow. I did not understand why, but something deep inside me knew we had already crossed a line there was no returning from. I grabbed my coat from behind the counter, barely believing what I was doing. Part of me wanted to run to the kitchen, lock the door, and call the police. But another part, the part that had lived with emptiness and unanswered questions for 2 long years, pushed me toward the waiting men. I followed them out into the foggy night where a black car idled along the curb, its engine humming steadily, its back door already open. I slid into the rear seat, and he watched me through the rear view mirror before speaking, his voice deep and edged with something close to grief. "I am Michael's brother," he said. My breath caught painfully in my chest as I turned to look at him. Really look at him. The strong jawline, the sharp lines of his nose, the familiar intensity in his gaze. All of it echoing someone I once loved, someone gentler, someone who had smiled without shadows. "My name is Ethan," he continued softly. "Ethan Grayson, and I need you to tell me everything you know about my brother's death." The car sped through the night as if it had a destination I was never meant to know. And truthfully one I did not dare ask about while Ethan sat in the front seat in absolute silence, his hand resting on the steering wheel, his eyes fixed ahead as though even a single blink might cause him to lose something he could not afford to lose. No one spoke during the entire drive. And I pressed myself closer to the window, both hands clinging tightly to the necklace now fastened around my neck again, as if that tiny object were the only thing keeping me anchored to reality while the street lights outside slid past like faint streaks of fading gold. I had no idea where we were going, and strangely enough, I did not feel fear. Instead, a swirling confusion overtook me, a dizziness like my mind was scrambling to rearrange the pieces I had buried for 2 long years. Michael had a brother, and that brother was sitting only a few feet away from me. And all the questions about the past I had tried so hard to silence were now clamoring to be answered. After about 20 minutes, the car turned onto a private road, leading to a tall building rising quietly in the center of the city, and the underground parking garage opened before us as we descended into it like shadows. No one spoke until the elevator doors closed, and even then, Ethan stood with his back to me, though the tension in his shoulders told me enough about the storm inside him. When the doors opened, I followed him into a sprawling penthouse where everything radiated a cold, expensive elegance, polished wood floors, glass walls opening to the entire city, warm lighting that somehow managed to feel devoid of warmth. He walked to a corner of the room, poured himself a whiskey, and finally looked at me for the first time since we had entered the car. "Your name is Clare, right?" I nodded, unable to take my eyes off him. "Clare Dawson," I said, my voice slightly rough. Ethan lifted the glass to his lips, took a small sip, and set it down. "Where did you first meet Michael?" I drew a long breath, willing my voice not to tremble. "At the university library. I was working there part-time, and he came in often to sketch. He said he was studying architecture." "He lied," Ethan said without hesitation. "Michael never studied architecture. That was just a cover." My body stiffened as the words landed like a blow straight to my chest. "What do you mean?" "I mean my brother lived 2 lives, one with you and one with me. And that is what got him killed." I did not understand everything he said. But I understood enough to feel the ground shift beneath everything I thought I knew. He told me he wanted to leave the city, find work somewhere else, and then one day he just disappeared. No message, no trace. I waited, I called, I wrote letters. My voice caught as something tightened in my throat. I thought I had done something wrong. Ethan studied me for a long moment and the harshness in his gaze softened. You did nothing wrong. Michael loved you. I know that. And that is exactly why I need to know whether he ever revealed anything at all. Did anyone ever approach you? I shook my head. No, everything was normal. We walked in the park, cooked dinner, watched movies. He liked taking photos of me, liked listening when I read aloud. He once told me I was the only thing that made him feel truly alive. Ethan closed his eyes, and for a brief second, his face showed exhaustion, grief, and regret so deep it seemed carved into him. I lost contact with my brother 4 months before he died. The police did not investigate. They did not file a report. They knew exactly who he was. And I knew that if I did not dig for the truth myself, there would never be answers. I sat in the chair across from him, fingers intertwined to keep myself steady. What do you suspect? Ethan looked directly into my eyes. I suspect someone in my organization betrayed us, and I believe Michael figured it out. He may have tried to pull away. He may have planned to run with you, but someone did not allow that to happen. My heartbeat tightened painfully. So, you think I am in danger? Ethan did not answer right away. He stepped toward the window and looked down at the glowing city below. I know this much. If the person who killed Michael discovers you were close to him, they will not let it go, and I will not allow that to happen. I swallowed hard, each word he spoke growing heavier in the air. A part of me still struggled to believe any of this was real, that I had been taken into a world I could never have imagined 2 years ago. Yet here I was, sitting across from this cold, controlled man who seemed to have stepped out of a darker universe, and knowing that nothing from this moment on would ever be the same. I did not know how long I sat there, only that the air in the penthouse thickened as if the whole world was holding its breath while waiting for me to answer a question I had not yet spoken aloud. And Ethan stood silently before the vast window, hands in his pockets, his posture straight and strangely solitary. I watched him quietly, searching for even the smallest trace of Michael and the man before me, but there was none. For Ethan was sharp where Michael had been gentle, guarded where Michael had been soft as early spring, and yet they were brothers. I drew a deep breath, forcing myself to break the silence. I did not know much about Michael's past, I began, my voice echoing through the stillness like a single drop falling into a quiet lake. He avoided talking about his family. Whenever I asked, he said old stories were not worth mentioning. I thought he was just someone who did not get along with his parents like many students in this city. But now I stopped, feeling a small tear inside my chest. Ethan did not turn, but I knew he was listening. He used to disappear on Sunday afternoons, I continued. At first, I thought he had a part-time job. Once I asked, and he said he was doing freelance architectural sketches for a firm. I believed him. I wanted to believe him, but sometimes his clothes had a faint smell of gunpowder. And I told myself it was from construction sites. I see now how naive that was. Ethan shifted slightly, and his gaze cut toward me like a thin blade. Did you ever notice anyone following you? No, I said immediately. We lived very quietly. Michael avoided crowded places and never took me anywhere unfamiliar. He always chose small cafes, quiet parks. We rented a tiny apartment near Walnut Bridge for a while. He kept everything so tidy. I remember once I touched a small box in his closet, and he reacted so strongly, not angry, but afraid. He took it from me and held it like something sacred. I never saw the box again. Ethan stared at me as though trying to see inside my mind for answers. Do you know what that box was? I asked softly. I can guess, Ethan replied. Michael kept records of things, he questioned. He and I had a terrible argument before he disappeared. I wanted him out of Philadelphia. I knew someone inside the organization was no longer loyal. Michael refused to leave. He said he had something he needed to uncover. I bit my lip, my heart beating faster. And you found his body? Ethan did not respond right away. He sat in the chair across from me, and for the first time, he no longer looked like an unbreakable shadow of power, but a man carrying a burden no one else could see. Not exactly. His body was delivered to me inside a suitcase left in the basement of a parking garage. No fingerprints, no note, just one gunshot wound to the chest and the family ring placed in his hand. I covered my mouth with my hands, my eyes widening as nausea rose in my throat. Michael, the man I had loved and trusted, had died like that, discarded like something with no worth. Ethan closed his eyes. I do not know who did it, but I know why. And I believe you are the last person who knew who Michael truly was. A shiver passed through me, not out of fear of Ethan, but because I suddenly understood that the scattered pieces of memory I had once shared with Michael were now the only surviving keys to a truth that someone had tried very hard to bury. And I also understood that if I knew anything the traitor wanted hidden, then my life, from this moment on, no longer belonged solely to me. I curled up on the ash-gray leather sofa, my hands clasped tightly in my lap, while my eyes remained fixed on the indistinct darkness beyond the glass. The city below was still glowing, each window in every high-rise building staring back at me like cold, watchful eyes observing my every movement, the movements of people who lived in the shadows. Ethan had left the room about 15 minutes earlier, leaving me alone with my tangled thoughts and the ever-growing pile of unanswered questions. I was not locked in and I was not being threatened. Yet, it was achingly clear that this was not a place I could simply walk out of. Ethan called it protection. To me, it felt like a polished, elegant form of temporary captivity. The penthouse was so quiet I could hear the faint hum of the air conditioner in the corner of the ceiling, and everything was arranged with an unnatural precision. Too neat, too orderly. No signs of everyday life, no family photographs, no stray notes or forgotten belongings, just a sterile kind of perfection that resembled an exhibit more than a home, clean but unbearably lonely. I stood and walked slowly around the room, each heartbeat falling out of sync with the silence. I did not know how much I could trust Ethan. He was Michael's brother. Yes, he was grieving and angry. Yes, but men like him. Men who could control an entire underground world with a single nod were not easily read. Their minds were places you could wander in forever without finding a door. The sliding glass door to the balcony was slightly ajar. And I pushed it open, stepping into the night where the wind slid through my hair with a sharp winter chill. From here, I could see the roads looping below like glowing veins. Tiny cars rushing through the darkness like restless toys. Somewhere down there was the world I used to belong to. The world with Sophie, with the small diner, with the simple, unremarkable days I once longed to escape. And now I found myself wishing desperately to return to them. I leaned against the railing, my fingers gripping the cold metal, and I felt the ache of missing Michael. Not the soft romantic ache of a remembered love, but something fractured and bitter. The weight of all the things he never said, all the truths he hid, all the embraces that now felt like shields against secrets I never saw coming. I did not even know if I was crying because the wind dried my tears before they could fall. The sound of a door opening behind me made me turn sharply. Ethan stood there holding a glass of water, which he set on the small table near the balcony door. "You should eat something," he said. Not quite an order and not quite a suggestion. I shook my head. "I am not hungry." He did not insist. Instead, he stepped beside me, hands in his pockets, his eyes searching the city as though looking for something long buried under time. "I understand how you feel," he said after a long pause, "being pulled into a world that is not yours. Michael was like that, too. He was never truly part of any of this. He wanted out. He wanted a normal life. And you did not let him leave," I said before I could stop myself, the accusation slipping out of my voice. Ethan turned, his gaze steady but deep. "No, I tried. I allowed it. But this world does not let people walk away so easily." I did not know if that was a confession, an excuse, or simply the cruel truth, but it made the night feel colder. "I am not Michael," I said slowly. "I do not want anything to do with what you or your people are involved in. I just want to be safe. I want to go home." Ethan nodded as though he had expected that. "And I will make sure of that. But for that to happen, I need you to stay here for a while. Only a few days until I know everything is secure." "You are afraid someone will kill me." "I am afraid someone is already watching you and you have no idea," he answered, his voice dropping lower. "And if Michael died protecting a secret, then the people still alive will not hesitate to kill the person holding the last piece of it." I turned away, unable to respond. Because for the first time in 2 years, I did not only feel the loss of Michael, I felt myself slipping away as well. The next morning when I woke, pale winter light filtered through the heavy curtains, and it took me several seconds to remember where I was. The room was still as silent as if time moved slower there than anywhere else. I heard soft footsteps outside, followed by a gentle knock. I rose and opened the door. Ethan stood there holding a small old wooden box that looked worn and heavy. He did not speak. He simply offered it to me. "Michael's," he said, his eyes fixed on mine. "I have kept it since I found him. I think it is time you have it." I accepted the box with both hands, feeling the weight not only of the wood, but of the memories inside. Ethan walked away without another word, leaving me alone in the stillness. I sat on the edge of the bed, my palms trembling slightly as I placed the box on my lap. The lid creaked softly as I opened it, and the scent of old wood mixed with something achingly familiar tightened my chest. Inside were several objects I recognized instantly as Michael's. A vintage silver watch he once told me belonged to his grandfather, the leather strap worn, and the glass slightly scratched. A small brown leather notebook with a softened spine and a few faded photographs tucked between its pages, and finally a roll of undeveloped camera film. I lifted each item carefully, feeling as though I were touching pieces of him, fragments I thought I had lost forever, and the photographs were all of me. I read slowly through the notebook, the slanted handwriting so familiar it felt like a hand on my heart. Michael wrote about our days together, about mornings when I overslept, and he sketched me in the golden light through the window, and some pages held only quick, scattered notes, locations, times, names, and then, slipping between those notes, a single sentence repeated again and again. "She must never know." I paused when I reached a passage where the handwriting grew hurried, the ink darker and heavier, as if written in fear. "I'm not sure how much time I have left. Someone has followed me. I have seen the shadow 3 times now. If Ethan is right, then it is too late. But if I disappear, Claire must never know. She cannot." A crushing pressure tightened inside my chest. I pulled the notebook to my heart, tears sliding down without my noticing. He knew. He had known someone was coming. He had tried to protect me until the very end. Another knock sounded. I wiped my tears quickly and placed everything back into the box. Ethan entered, this time carrying 2 cups of hot coffee. He handed one to me and sat in the chair by the window. Neither of us spoke for several minutes. I knew he was waiting. Finally, I set the cup down and spoke, my voice still unsteady. "He recorded everything, not clearly, but I think he was tracking someone. He knew there was a traitor in your organization, and he knew he was not safe." Ethan nodded, his face unmoving, though I could see the deep, quiet grief in his eyes. I did not listen to him. I thought I could protect him. I was wrong. "Michael did not blame you," I said softly. "I can see that in the way he wrote. He was only afraid that I would be pulled into this." Ethan stayed silent for a long moment before saying, his voice dropping like a stone into water. "I did not know Michael kept these things. If I had seen them sooner, maybe I would have uncovered the traitor. Maybe. He did not finish. But I understood. I held the box close to my chest. And in that moment, I knew I would never be able to walk away from this as an outsider, whether I wanted it or not. What Michael left behind had bound me to Ethan, to the truth still hidden, and perhaps to the danger now moving closer than it had ever been. That night after Ethan left the penthouse to attend an urgent meeting, he did not explain. I remained alone with the wooden box still resting on the coffee table, and although I had already read through the notebook earlier, something in me felt as though a piece of the truth was still hiding somewhere between its pages. I opened the lid again, lifted the notebook, and this time paid closer attention to every page, every small mark I had overlooked in my first hurried read. Michael once told me I read everything too quickly, as if I were always afraid time might slip through my fingers, but nothing he left behind could be rushed. Some pages were half-written, some lines crossed out, and beneath those crossed lines were new ones, smaller and more hesitant, as though he was debating whether those thoughts should be preserved at all. One set of notes made me stop cold. Friday, 11:30, South Pier, he appeared again. This time, he was not alone. Ethan will not believe me without proof. Claire must not see this. She will ask. She always asks, but if she knows. I stopped reading. A chill slid down my spine. Michael had seen someone. Someone from Ethan's world, but not someone Ethan expected. The entries that followed grew fragmented, as if he had begun writing in haste or had been interrupted. Saw him again on Monday. This time he was smiling, not polite. A smile that says he knows I will not get out. If something happens, tell Ethan not to trust anyone who was present at the meeting on the 12th of November. A sketch was tucked between the pages, drawn quickly but with striking precision, the face of a man with narrow eyes, a square jaw, and slicked back hair. I did not recognize him, but the tension in the lines of the drawing was unmistakable, as if Michael's hand had been trembling. I picked up the roll of undeveloped film, placing it beside the notebook. Perhaps the images inside would reveal the face of the man who had taken Michael's life. I took photos of the most important pages on my phone, especially the sketch, then placed everything back into the box. As I closed the lid, the door opened and Ethan walked in, his eyes immediately sharpening as he saw my expression and moved toward me. "You found something?" I nodded wordlessly and handed him the notebook open to the entry about the November meeting. Ethan read quickly, his gaze darting across each line like a man searching for confirmation of what he already feared. When he reached the sketch, he stared at it for a long moment, his mouth tightening into a thin line. "I know him," he murmured almost to himself. "I thought he left the city last year. I did not think he was still here. Who is he?" I asked, though dread was already curling inside me. Ethan did not reply immediately. He looked at me as if weighing how much truth I could bear. Finally, he pulled out his phone, sent a short message, and only then met my eyes again. "His name is Leo Marquez. He used to be my right hand, the man I trusted most after Michael." I did not need to hear more because that alone told me why Michael had been afraid to confess anything to his brother. He had been trying to protect him. And if Leo knew Michael suspected him, then Michael's death was not a reckless accident or a consequence of bad choices. It was a warning. Ethan closed his eyes for a brief moment, as if letting the anger burn unchecked would consume everything. And when he opened them again, he had become someone else, cold, calculating, a man carved from restraint and vengeance. From this moment on, you do not leave this apartment unless I am with you. Do not open the door for anyone. If anything happens, run to the bedroom, lock the door, and press the red button behind the painting. It is an emergency exit. I nodded, my fingers tightening together. I did not ask what would happen next because Michael's notebook had made it painfully clear that these pages were not just memories. They were a testament, and I would have to carry them until the truth was finally unearthed. The night grew late, but sleep refused to come. Michael's words circled inside my mind like an echo that would not fade. And something in the way he wrote about Leo Marquez made me feel he had been trying to leave behind one last trail. Not only to expose the traitor, but to protect Ethan from the very organization he believed he controlled. I lay on the bed staring at the ceiling, listening to Ethan's footsteps pacing the living room, the occasional sound of a glass meeting the table, or his fingers tapping lightly against the window pane. He was not as composed as he appeared, and that frightened me more than any threat could. Around 2 o'clock in the morning, a soft knock sounded at my door. I jolted upright, hesitating before opening it. Ethan stood there, holding a thin stack of files, his eyes tired, but sharply focused. He did not ask whether he had woken me. He simply extended the documents toward me. I stepped aside as he entered and closed the door behind him before taking a seat in the chair near the window. "I need your help with something," he said quietly. I opened the file. Inside were several surveillance photographs, most of them showing a man with thick black hair and sharp angular features, Leo Marquez. Some images captured him speaking with people I had never seen. In places that looked nothing like legitimate business locations. Beside the photos were pages of handwritten notes, not Michael's, but Ethan's, the lines crisp and controlled like the man himself. "I believe Leo is running a separate underground operation completely removed from my organization. Michael discovered this and he may have been gathering evidence. But if what the notebook says is true, then Leo realized Michael was tracking him and Michael's death was no accident." I nodded, my voice trembling. "What do you want me to do?" Ethan looked straight into my eyes. "I need you to help me find where Michael kept the original photographs or any evidence he may have hidden before he disappeared. You were the last person close to him. If he trusted anyone to keep something safe, it would have been you." I hesitated. "I do not know anything. Michael never said." "I know," Ethan cut in gently. "But he might have left something you did not realize was meant for you. A letter, a drive, or even a place only the two of you shared." I exhaled shakily, the pressure in my chest feeling heavy enough to crush bone. "You trust me that much?" Ethan was silent for a moment before speaking softly. Michael loved you. That was real. And I think he is still depending on you even now. I looked down at the file, my heart unsteady. I was not someone who stayed calm under pressure. I was just a waitress from a small diner who once dreamed of warm afternoons and quiet evenings with someone waiting at home. Now here I was, standing at the edge of choices no one in my old world could imagine. I need to go back to the old apartment, I finally whispered. The place Michael and I lived. He kept a small wooden box under the floorboard. I saw him hide it once, but never asked what it was. Maybe that is where he left something. Ethan nodded. I will send someone with you tomorrow morning. He stood, gathered the files, but left one photograph on the table, one of Michael standing with his back to the camera, looking out over a pier bathed in late afternoon light, final glow of a day fading into darkness. I stared at that photograph long after Ethan left my room. And for the first time since learning he was gone, I no longer felt fear. I felt purpose, for him, for the truth, and for myself. The next morning, I woke to pale sunlight filtering through the curtains and a soft knock at the door. A tall, quiet man in his 40s, wearing a dark suit, introduced himself as Harris, and explained he had been assigned to accompany me to the old apartment. I carried very little with me, only a small bag, Michael's notebook, and the undeveloped film, as though these things were talismans I needed to face the past. The apartment in the Kensington district had not changed in 2 years. Still the same red brick building with a worn carpet in the hallway and the faint scent of damp wood. The landlord recognized me and looked away quickly, as though eager to avoid anything complicated. I stepped into the familiar room. Everything covered in a thin layer of dust, but arranged exactly as it had been when Michael lived here, the old armchair by the window, the faded cream curtains, the uneven bookshelf leaning slightly to one side. Harris stood guard at the door, his eyes fixed on the hallway. I knelt and lifted the small rug in the bedroom, the place where Michael used to hide important things. One of the floorboards was loose. I pried it up gently and found a small wooden box wrapped in metal wire. I exhaled and placed it on the bed using the tiny key hidden inside my locket to unlock it. Inside lay a portable hard drive, several pages of Michael's handwritten notes, and a small memory card sealed in plastic. I had barely touched the items when the door behind me swung open. Harris entered, his expression unchanged, yet something about it felt wrong. "You found it already?" he asked calmly. I nodded, clutching the hard drive against my chest. "I have to bring this to Ethan." Harris stepped closer, his eyes shifting in a way that made the hairs on my arms rise. "Give it to me. I will take it to him safely." I stepped back. Something in his voice made my stomach twist. "No, I will take it myself." Harris's face did not change, but his hand dropped toward his waist. "Claire, do not make this difficult. Ethan is busy. Let me handle it. Hand it over." I shook my head, my heartbeat thundering. I looked directly at him, cold eyes, no hesitation. No surprise at seeing the drive as though he had already known exactly where it was. A voice inside me screamed to run, but I stood my ground and whispered. You knew the hard drive was here. How? Michael never told anyone, unless, Harris's lips curved into a faint smile, one that never touched his eyes. You are smarter than you look. I stepped back again. You killed Michael. You did. He did not deny it. His gaze sharpened. Michael was naive. He thought he could play spy in a world built on blood. Leo was just a shadow. I was the one who handled the dirty work. And Ethan would never have known if you had just handed me the drive. I tightened my grip. You were his right hand, his closest man. Which is why he never suspected me, Harris said, his voice frighteningly calm. And I intend to keep it that way. My eyes flicked to the kitchen counter where a small fruit knife still rested. The same one I used every morning years ago. Harris took another step, reaching for his gun. That old South Side instinct screamed. I didn't think. I just moved. I didn't go for the kitchen knife. It was too far. I lunged for the closest thing, the heavy glass lamp on the nightstand. I grabbed it and swung it with all my strength, not at his arm, but at his head. He was faster. He raised his arm to block it, and I heard a sickening crack as the lamp shattered against his forearm. He roared in pain, but he grabbed my shirt with his other hand, pulling me close. I didn't try to get his gun. I clawed at his face, my nails digging for his eyes. He yelled and shoved me back hard. I slammed into the wall, stars exploding behind my eyes, but the shove had put me closer to the door. I didn't look back. I just scrambled into the hallway, screaming, "Fire! Fire!" at the top of my lungs. I could hear Harris shouting, his footsteps behind me. But I kept running. The hard drive clutched so tightly it felt fused to my palm. When I burst onto the street, a black car screeched to a stop in front of me. The door flew open. Ethan jumped out, a look of shock and fear I had never seen on his face. "Claire, what happened?" I thrust the hard drive toward him, my breath ragged. "Harris, it was him. Michael knew, and now I know, too." Ethan froze for a single second. Then his expression shifted completely. No longer cold, no longer controlled, but consumed by a primal fury so deep that I understood. In that instant, nothing would ever return to the way it had been before. Ethan did not say a single word when I handed him the hard drive. The blood on my hands still dripping, the metallic scent clinging to my fingernails and soaking into the thin fabric of my shirt. And he did not ask how I had been hurt or what exactly had happened inside that apartment. He simply gripped the hard drive and ordered the driver to turn the car around, while I sat in the back seat with my chest still rising and falling from the frantic escape, though fear had already given way to something else, something far closer to anger. And I realized I was no longer the Clare who bowed her head and let life happen to her. Not after I had almost died because I trusted the wrong person. Not after discovering Michael might have known the truth yet stayed silent just to protect me. When we reached the penthouse, Ethan led me straight up to the attic level, a place I had never been allowed before. A room with its own security system, soundproofed walls, and only a few objects, a computer at the center of a table, several wall-mounted screens, and a city map filled with annotated markings. He set the hard drive down, plugged it in, and within seconds, the files appeared, and I saw the names of locations, lists of wire transfers, screenshots of encrypted messages, all pointing to one thing. Harris, the man who had stood guard at my door, who had driven me back to the old apartment, who had pretended to protect me while planning to kill me. I didn't watch. The moment the adrenaline faded, my body betrayed me. I stumbled into the adjoining bathroom, my legs giving out and collapsed to the cold tile floor. I emptied my stomach into the toilet, my entire body shaking in a violent, uncontrollable tremor that had nothing to do with restlessness. This was the raw, jagged edge of shock. I looked at my hands. They were scraped raw, and one of Harris's hairs was trapped under my fingernail. I felt another wave of nausea. Ethan appeared in the doorway. He wasn't holding a glass of water or offering comfort. He just looked down at me, his face grim. I tried to blind him, I whispered, the words horrifying me. "You survived," he said, his voice flat. "That's all that matters now." He turned and walked back to the computer, leaving me to pull my shattered pieces back together. The girl who wiped tables was gone. The person left in her place was someone I didn't even know. I knew that was not true. I could not return to the diner or walk down a street without looking over my shoulder because whatever this was, it had already taken root deep inside me. "You are going to kill him, aren't you?" I asked, my voice steady. Ethan held my gaze for a long moment. "If he stays alive, more people will die. He betrayed everything I believed in. He betrayed Michael, and now he has come after you." I did not answer. I did not need a justification from him, only to understand what he would do with the pain burning inside him. An hour later, I stood on the living room balcony, watching the city stretch out beneath the fading light, and Ethan stepped beside me with his hands in his pockets. "He will not return," he said quietly without looking at me. And I knew exactly what that meant. So I asked nothing more. I turned toward him and for the first time I no longer saw Michael's reflection anywhere in his face. Ethan was someone else entirely. And though a part of me had feared him once, thinking him cold and merciless, I now saw the truth, that beneath the armor was a man with a single purpose, to protect, no matter the cost. And whether I intended it or not, I had become part of that purpose. "Have you ever thought about stopping?" I asked, not expecting the answer to be yes. Ethan kept his eyes on the horizon. "I did before Michael died. He used to say that after the final job, we would dissolve everything, each of us living a new life." I believed him. And now he turned to me, his eyes softer than I had ever seen them. Now I have to clean up the mess we created so he can rest and so people like you will not have to run anymore." I nodded, the last of the sunlight flashing against the glass and stinging my eyes. And I realized I no longer knew exactly who I was. But I did know one thing. I was not the girl wiping tables, waiting for someone to come back. Michael was gone, but he had left behind an unfinished promise. And Ethan was carrying what remained. And I somehow had stepped into the middle of it, not because I was forced, but because I had chosen to stay. No one survives loss and remains unchanged. And neither did I. And I was beginning to understand that to reach the truth, sometimes you have to be willing to walk into the places where the light cannot reach. Ethan woke me the next morning with a short, firm announcement that we had to leave, offering no detailed explanation, only that there were signs a group once loyal to Harris had discovered our current location, and that he could not rule out the possibility of someone else watching us from inside the system. I did not argue. I packed quietly, my hands trembling as I folded Michael's notebook and placed it in my bag, sensing from the look in Ethan's eyes that this was not simply a temporary move, but a turning point, a departure with no path back. The armored black SUV rolled out of the underground garage shortly after 7. Ethan sitting in the front beside the driver while I sat in the back with another guard, and the air inside was so thick with silence that even the low murmur of the traffic report from the radio sounded like a disguise for the tension growing stronger with each passing mile. I did not ask where we were going because I knew Ethan would not tell me, and he never did anything without a plan. Yet this time, something in me felt a strange rising dread, as if my instincts were pounding at every nerve in my body, warning me to brace for the worst. When the car turned onto a nearly empty stretch of highway, 2 motorcycles appeared behind us, following at a deliberate, steady distance. I glanced into the rear-view mirror, trying to remain calm as my heartbeat quickened, and the guard beside me moved his hand toward the gun beneath his jacket. Ethan looked back at me sharply. "Do not look behind you. Get down." I obeyed immediately, and within seconds, the screech of tires tore through the air, followed by the metallic clatter of bullets striking glass like hailstones. The first round hit the driver's window, bouncing off without penetrating, but enough to make the driver jerk the wheel, sending the SUV swerving left before regaining control. Ethan drew his gun, ordering the guard to activate the ballistic shield and shift the car into defensive mode. And more gunfire rained down, metal against metal, the windshield cracking in a thin spiderweb pattern. As I lay curled on the floor with my arms over my head, every sense burning. We were under attack, not by one group. I heard another engine ahead, a pickup truck sliding across the road to block us, forcing the driver to brake sharply. Ethan growled, throwing open the door before the car had completely stopped and yanking me out with swift precision. "Run with me," he ordered, leaving no room for hesitation. So I followed him toward a row of abandoned warehouses at the edge of the highway. As more shots erupted behind us and tires screeched like something being torn apart, one of the guards went down, but I could not bring myself to look back. Ethan dragged me into a dim storage building where faint daylight trickled through holes in the metal roof, slammed the door, jammed a steel bar against it, and gestured for silence. My heart hammered, not from fear of dying, but from the realization I was seeing Ethan truly out of control for the first time. He called someone, his voice clipped and furious. "We have a breach inside the system. Internal betrayal. Bring the team to point C now. We are surrounded." He ended the call and sat beside me, sweat on his brow. "I am sorry," he whispered without meeting my eyes. "I underestimated them." I shook my head and grabbed his hand, feeling the cold edge of metal beneath his skin mixed with our shared will to survive. "We will get out," I said, though I was not sure it was true. But in that moment, amidst gunfire and shadows, I realized something. I was no longer the one being protected. I was part of this battle, and I would not step back. We were rescued by a silent support team, Ethan called the Mute Squad. Men who moved with eerie precision and barely a sound. And within less than 10 minutes, the entire area around the warehouse had been secured, the attackers fleeing and leaving behind burning vehicles and the lingering stench of gunpowder. Ethan did not return to the penthouse. Instead, he took me out of the city in an unmarked vehicle, passing several concealed checkpoints under false identities. And by dawn we arrived at an old estate in the rural western region of Pennsylvania. Surrounded by pine forests, mist, and a stillness so complete it felt suspended in time. The iron gate creaked open slowly, revealing a 3-story house with gray roof tiles and tall arched windows that looked as though it belonged to an old novel, both wild and haunting. Ethan said it once belonged to a friend of his father's, and that no one connected to Harris's network would know of it. The gardener and cook had long since left, leaving the place so quiet that every footstep on the wooden floor echoed like a sigh from the past. I was given a room on the east side where the morning light spilled across dust-covered glass while Ethan spent his days turning the old library into a temporary command center, filling a leather-bound room with maps, surveillance feeds, and phone calls that lasted into the night. Days passed in a tense silence. Ethan spoke less but worked more. Scanning data from the hard drive, coordinating with his people, hunting down the last hidden traitors. I watched him from a distance, often wondering what kind of man carried the weight of an entire world on his shoulders without collapsing. At night, I lay awake in my room, listening to the wind pushing through the pine branches, the soft rattle of leaves against the roof, the occasional sound of Ethan's footsteps echoing from the hall. I no longer dreamed of Michael. The memories of him were beginning to shift from hurt to gratitude. If he had lived, he would have taken me far from all this. But if he had lived, he would also have stood beside Ethan and fought to the end. I began helping Ethan decode fragments of audio files Michael had stored on the memory card found in the old apartment. Some files were encrypted, but others contained faint, disjointed recordings. Michael's voice filled the stillness of the library, both familiar and distant, and he mentioned a name Ethan had never spoken. Grant, a shadowy figure who had appeared in underground dealings in Baltimore, someone Michael believed was the final link connecting Harris to a larger network beyond Ethan's control. When I told Ethan, he did not look surprised. He simply nodded and said he would have his people dig deeper. And gradually, I began to realize I was no longer merely someone Ethan was sheltering. I understood the system, the structure, the minds of the men trying to hide in the dark. And Ethan began to look at me differently, less as someone he had to protect and more as someone walking beside him, someone capable. I had changed. I was no longer the girl wiping tables during a quiet shift. I had seen the brutality of this world, and instead of turning away, I chose to stay. The estate, hidden in the deep woods and shrouded in mist, became the first place where I truly felt awake. No longer running, no longer waiting for someone to save me. I was learning to stand on my own, and for the first time, I felt strong enough to do it. The rain began to fall on the third afternoon we stayed at the estate. A long, persistent rain that felt as if it were trying to wash away every trace of the days we had spent running. I sat in the library with the soft yellow lamplight brushing across the open half-finished page in front of me. Though my mind had drifted far from the words, Ethan stood in the opposite corner reading a freshly printed report. One hand wrapped around the cup of coffee I had made for him. The steady rhythm of rain tapping against the window pane played like an old familiar melody. And for the first time in days, the space between us felt gentler, easier to breathe in, no longer held together only by tension and unfinished plans. He set the papers down and looked up at me, and his eyes were no longer the cold eyes of the man I had first met, nor the guarded walls of someone who lived only for vengeance. Something had shifted in him, quiet but undeniable, like the faintest glimmer of light after a storm. I smiled, a small, tender smile that carried more gratitude than any words I could have spoken. "Did you sleep at all?" I asked in a soft voice. Ethan shook his head, then gave a slight nod. "A little, but my mind will not stay quiet. I keep thinking about Michael, about what he saw, but never had time to say." I set my notebook down and walked toward him, stopping when only a small space separated us. "You did everything you could, Ethan. And he knew that. If he had not trusted you, he would never have left everything behind for you to find." Ethan lowered his gaze as if hiding from something he did not want me to read in his eyes. I thought I had to be strong because I was the only one left. But maybe I was wrong. There are moments when I feel myself breaking apart piece by piece and no one sees it. I did not think, did not hesitate. I simply reached out and touched the back of his hand. A hand that had held a gun, given orders, shielded me from the thin line between life and death. Yet now, within my reach, felt softer and more fragile than it ever had. He did not pull away. Instead, his fingers closed around mine, and he looked directly into my eyes. We did not speak, but in that quiet moment, the sound of the rain faded until the world felt reduced to this single room scented with old wood, to our uneven breaths, to the thrum of my heart tripping over itself. He reached up, brushing aside a loose strand of hair that had fallen across my forehead, letting his touch rest gently against my cheek. "Clare," he said my name as though he needed to make sure I was truly there, truly seeing him not as a man carrying shadows, but as someone with a heart that had been shattered more than once. I nodded, lips parting to speak, but I did not have the chance, because in the next breath, he leaned down and his mouth met mine in a kiss so soft, so fleeting, yet it sent my entire world reeling. It was not hurried, not wild, not dramatic. It was the culmination of all the hurt, the loss, and the silence we had carried. It was the first moment since Michael's death that I felt alive without pain, without guilt, only present. When he pulled away, his gaze stayed on me as though afraid I might disappear. I placed my hand against his chest, feeling the uneven beat of his heart matching my own. "I do not know what tomorrow will bring," I whispered. "But today, I know I am not alone." Ethan smiled, a rare warm smile I had never seen on him before. "Neither am I." Outside, the rain kept falling. But inside that room, for the first time in a long time, we allowed ourselves to be fragile, to be close, without explanations or armor. And I understood that no matter what the future held or how much darkness waited ahead, this moment would be what we carried with us to cross everything that still lay before us. The next morning brought no rain, only a thick veil of fog around the estate, turning the sky into a muted shroud of gray. I woke earlier than usual, as if some instinct had nudged me awake. Ethan was already gone, though the coffee on his table was still warm. I walked down the hall, my footsteps echoing like a sigh, until I found him standing on the porch wearing a black leather jacket with a gun at his hip and an earpiece clipped to one ear. Two members of the silent squad stood beside him, faces expressionless, eyes unreadable. The moment he turned toward me, I knew he was leaving today. And there was a chance he would not return the same, if he returned at all. "Where are you going?" I asked, though the answer was already in my chest. Ethan stepped closer, his gaze softening. "Grant has surfaced. He is in the southern outskirts. This is the only chance to end this before he disappears again." My fists clenched helplessly. "Why not send someone else? You can command them from here." Ethan shook his head. "This is mine to finish. Michael died because of him. Because of everything we uncovered. I cannot sit here when the moment finally comes. I have to end this." I stepped forward, gripping his arm. "Are you sure? This is dangerous. His entire network is still out there. You do not know what you are walking into." Ethan held my gaze, and something unhidden flickered in his eyes. "I know, and I am ready. If I do not come back, Claire, you must leave. There is a bag in the study behind the fourth shelf. Inside are a passport, cash, and the key to a safe apartment. You will be protected." I shook my head as tears rose despite me. "Do not talk like you are not coming back. Do not make me wait in fear again." He cupped my cheek, his touch trembling. "I will return if there is a path back. But if I do not do this, I will carry the regret for the rest of my life." All I could do was nod, the helplessness heavy as stone. I had lived through loss once. I had lost Michael without a chance for goodbye. Now I feared losing Ethan, the man who had crashed into my life like a storm, destroying everything, yet teaching me how to stand on my own. He pressed a slow kiss to my forehead. "Wait for me," he whispered, then turned away, disappearing into the fog with the silent men behind him. I stayed on the porch long after their footsteps faded into the trees. Then I returned to the library, sat where he always worked, and opened Michael's notebook beside the new one I had begun since arriving at the estate. The blank pages waited as though for an ending not yet written. Every minute was a heartbeat missed. I paced. I checked the clock. I checked my phone. I returned to the window and stared down the winding dirt road swallowed by fog. My mind full of him, his voice, his quiet steps, the way he looked at me as if he saw both my fears and my strength. I did not pray. I had prayed once for Michael, and nothing answered. But I still whispered into the silence. A fragile, stubborn hope that Ethan would return. Not triumphant, not victorious, but simply alive. Alive to come back to me. Alive to continue what we had not yet begun. I did not know how long I sat by the window before the daylight dimmed into a violet dusk and the hallway lamps flickered awake. The old library clock ticked steadily, reminding me that every passing minute meant he was either drifting farther away or drawing closer. And I had no way of knowing which fate was unfolding. When the estate gates creaked open close to midnight, I ran outside without my coat, my heart pounding so hard it seemed to shape the air around me. The black car rolled to a stop, its headlights fading as the engine quieted and the door swung open. Ethan stepped out, limping, one shoulder soaked in blood. For an instant, I could not breathe. Then I was running toward him, the only thought in my mind that he was alive. "It is nothing," he murmured as I slid my arm beneath his to support him, his voice low and worn. "Just a graze." I did not believe him. The blood soaking through his coat said otherwise, but I asked nothing, guiding him inside, settling him on the long sofa in the sitting room, fetching towels and the medical kit almost by instinct. The men who had come with him vanished once they confirmed the place was secure. Ethan let me tend to him in silence, wincing only occasionally. The wound was not as deep as it looked, but he had lost more blood than he should have. When I wrapped the final bandage, he lifted his head and met my eyes. The darkness that had haunted him when he left that morning was gone, replaced by a strange calm, as if something had finally come to rest. "Grant is dead," he said quietly. He was not alone. There were 3 others with him, including someone from my own finance team. They had been planning this for 2 years, shifting the transport routes, laundering funds, taking over small branches to build their own network. Michael uncovered the truth, but Grant realized it one step earlier. My chest tightened at the sound of Michael's name, and Ethan squeezed my hand gently, an unspoken apology in his eyes. When I confronted Grant, he felt no remorse. He said Michael and I were naive to think we could hold a large organization without being consumed by ambition. He said loyalty does not survive in a world like ours. Emotion clogged my throat. I had no answer. Ethan leaned his head back, closing his eyes for a long moment before looking at me again, his gaze cutting through the last of the night. I killed him without hesitation, without another question. When he fell, I did not feel relief, only emptiness. I reached up and touched his face, wiping away the smear of dried blood near his ear. You did what was right. Michael wanted you to know the truth, and you brought it into the light. Ethan gave a tired, hollow smile I had seen only once before. But the price of the truth is blood. And now I am not sure there is anything left in that world I want to hold on to. I did not answer. I simply sat beside him as he leaned against me. A man who had carried too much for too long. Finally allowing himself to rest. Outside the fog began to fall again, thin and cold like the first nights we arrived at the estate. But this time I was not afraid. Ethan had come back, not only in body, but carrying the truth he had fought to reclaim. And I knew nothing after this night would ever be the same. We had both changed, blood and truth had done that to us. We sat together in the drawing room of the estate, the fire and the hearth crackling softly and filling the air with one of the few warm sounds in a space still heavy with everything left unsaid. And Ethan had already changed his bandage, pulled on a dark sweater again, and made hot tea for us both. He looked tired, but his eyes were no longer clouded with anger or loss. Instead, they held a quietness that had been filtered through the deepest part of his pain. He set his cup down on the table and leaned back into the armchair, as if gathering all his strength to open one last door in his memory, a door he had kept closed for a long time. And I sat close beside him with my arms wrapped around my knees, my gaze fixed on his face, where every line seemed carved by years and battles he never talked about. Michael left me a recording, Ethan said softly, his voice steady, but each word landing between us with the heavy weight of stone. It was hidden among the encrypted files. I only managed to open it after I came back from dealing with Grant. He made it 2 weeks before he disappeared. I did not speak. I only nodded lightly to let him know I was ready to listen, even though inside me something was already trembling like an unnamed wave. And Ethan took a small device from his pocket and pressed a button. After a few seconds of faint static, Michael's familiar voice came through. The same low, calm tone I remembered, but with something in its cadence that tightened my throat. If Ethan is listening to this, it means I did not make it back, he said. You know me. I always believed you would find everything out sooner or later. And I also believe you will not stop once you see the truth, no matter how brutal it is. But what matters more is not the traitors or the bastards like Grant. What I need you to remember is why we started. We once thought we could build a system that could control the dark. I was wrong. Darkness cannot be controlled. It only devours everything unless someone is brave enough to step out of it. Ethan, I am not that person anymore. But you still can be. His voice faltered into a long silence, and I could feel each breath he took in that recording as if he were sitting somewhere close by between us among the broken pieces of memory that had never truly healed. And if Clare is hearing this, his voice grew gentler. Forgive me for not telling you everything. I did not want you to live with fear or anger. You are the one thing I never wanted to drag into this world, but I know you are strong enough to survive it. And if Ethan is still alive, if he is by your side, then I know you are still protected. The two of you are the best decisions in this messy life of mine. Keep living. Do not stop because of me. The sound ended with a soft click, and I looked down at my hands and saw they were shaking, tears already spilling without my noticing, while Ethan said nothing, sitting there with his own eyes reddened, as if both of us had just been pulled by Michael out of the last patch of darkness in our hearts. He knew, I whispered, my voice breaking. And he still trusted. Ethan nodded and tightened his hand around mine. He never doubted that, he said quietly, even when he knew he would not make it back. I rested my head on his shoulder and let my tears sink into the fabric of his sweater, letting the silence between us speak for everything we could not put into words. Michael was gone, but his final words were a key that opened the door we had both been afraid to face, a future without him, but still moving forward. And somewhere I believed he was smiling, because at last we had heard him, and we understood. I took the old leather-bound notebook Michael had always carried, the edges worn and a few pages beginning to loosen from the spine, and brought it upstairs to my room, where I sat by the window that looked out over the line of pines, the same spot where I had spent so many afternoons watching the trees and waiting in silence for Ethan to return from his work. But today was different. I was no longer waiting for anyone, only wanting to hear Michael's voice again through the words he had written, the thoughts he never had time to speak aloud. The first page contained a short passage written in his careful, familiar hand. If someone is reading these lines, it may mean I no longer have enough time to tell everything, but I hope at least you will understand the reason. I turned to the next pages and found detailed notes about transactions, about creeping suspicions, about secret meetings with contacts he could not name to anyone. And between those cold fragments of information, were short lines like private reminders, simple sentences heavy with feeling. Ethan will never forgive me if I am wrong. But I would rather have him angry with me than watch everything collapse in front of him. I am no longer sure I still believe, but I keep going for them. For Ethan, for Clare. My heart twisted each time I saw my name. And for a moment, I wondered if everything would have been different had I never entered his life. But the more I read, the clearer it became that I was not the reason. Michael chose that dangerous path. I was part of the reason he did not turn back. Near the end of the notebook, the ink grew darker, the writing more hurried, as if written in haste, the words bleeding slightly onto the next page. And there was a passage I had to stop and breathe before I could read from beginning to end. Clare, if you ever find these words, know that not for a single moment in my short life did I regret meeting you. You are the last gentle thing I could touch in the middle of this chaos. I never said it, but I know you felt it. Maybe Ethan did, too. And if in the end, I cannot be the one to hold your hand through the rest of the road, then I hope you will let someone else do it. Do not let my love keep you trapped in the past. Live, Clare, and love again. By the time I finished that line, my tears had blurred the page, and I pressed the notebook to my chest as if I were holding the last piece of him I could not yet release. Outside, The wind moved through the pines in a soft murmur like his voice carried from very far away. Ethan stood in the doorway before I realized he was there. He did not ask what I was reading and did not step in, only stayed quietly where he was, as if he understood this was something I needed to walk through alone. When I finally looked up at him, I gave him a small, trembling smile with my cheeks still wet. "He has forgiven everything," I said, my voice rough with emotion. "He wants us to keep living, both of us." Ethan crossed the room and sat beside me, gently taking my hand in his, a silent gesture of companionship that did not require promises. And we sat that way, looking out at the pale sky where a late shaft of sunlight was beginning to break through the gray. And I knew deep in my heart that Michael had left us his blessing, not only so I could lay the past down, but so I would have the courage to take hold of the present, a present in which pain had softened, and love was beginning to grow out of what had once seemed broken beyond repair. The next morning, the air was still. A thin layer of mist lay over the ground like a gray velvet cloth, and sunlight filtered through the trees in faint beams along the narrow path leading to the cemetery behind the estate. I walked beside Ethan with a bouquet of white lilies clutched in my hand, our steps slow as if each one carried all the words we had not yet spoken, and Ethan remained silent, moving with the quiet bearing of someone who had learned to let go, but would never forget. Michael's grave lay at the end of the line of trees. A small rise of earth marked by a simple stone engraved with unadorned words. Michael Grayson, brother, friend, the one who chose to hold on to the light in a world full of darkness. I stood for a long time before the headstone. My eyes fixed on his name. My heart stilled by a peace that felt both tender and sharp. Memories came back in an endless stream. His voice teasing me during late shifts. The way he watched me from across the counter and that final moment when I learned all the truths he had buried to protect me. I knelt and laid the lilies at the base of the stone, then brushed my fingers against the cold, hard surface. "I have read everything you wrote," I whispered. "And I know that if you were alive, you would never have let me fall into danger. But I also know that if you were alive, you would be the first to push me toward Ethan when I hesitated." I laughed softly through my tears, my eyes burning, yet my chest somehow lighter. "You were always strong, always carrying everything in silence. But now it is my turn to live the part you left unfinished. And I will live well, Michael." Ethan stood behind me and bowed his head deeply to the grave. One hand pressed over his heart in a gesture of farewell. "I am sorry I did not make it in time," he said quietly, his voice thick. "But I will not let your death be meaningless. You always saw what took me an entire journey to understand. Thank you for trusting me until the very end." I rose and slipped my arm around his, not needing to say anything more. He understood. And somewhere I believed Michael did, too. We stayed there for a long while as the wind moved through the branches above us, the rustling leaves sounding like distant whispers. A single leaf drifted down and settled on the lilies, like a final period at the end of the last chapter of the story he had left us. On the way back, I turned once more to look behind me. The small grave rested in the soft morning light, still and at peace. And for the first time after so much loss, I felt no gnawing regret, no torment, only gratitude. Gratitude for having been loved, protected, and given the freedom to go on when the one I loved chose to stop so that what was right could remain. That was the day I said goodbye to Michael, not with tears alone, but with a promise. A promise to live in a way worthy of the love he had once given me, and of the love that was slowly taking root in me for the man walking at my side. 3 months had passed since the day Ethan and I stood before the small grave nestled in the quiet woods. 3 months without gunfire, without suspicious glances in the rear-view mirror, without that constant sense of being watched with every step we took. And we left the estate a week after that, not because anyone was chasing us, but because it was time to step out of our refuge and begin again. And Ethan sold every asset tied to his old organization, dismantling what remained of the system Michael once said stood between the line of light and darkness. Because he believed that as long as any of it existed, someone somewhere would try to drag it back to what it used to be. We moved to a small lakeside town in Vermont where autumn blazed with golden leaves and winter wrapped the world in soft white snow. And the house we rented was not large but warm, with an open kitchen overlooking the backyard garden and a study filled with books. I took a part-time job at an old bookstore where each morning I rearranged shelves, brewed tea, and chatted with elderly patrons who carried entire lifetimes in their eyes. While Ethan spent most of his days working on a cybersecurity consulting project, quieter work, but still something that made him feel useful. And he was no longer the man who lived solely for vengeance. Every morning he woke early to make coffee, read the news, and greet me with a gentle smile. And every evening we cooked together, listened to classical music, and spoke softly about small things. On some nights, he told me stories about Michael. No longer heavy with grief, but with a tenderness that felt like honoring a precious piece of their shared past. I began writing my own story again, not as a memoir, but as a way to preserve memory. Writing about Forest Hill, about the locket that slipped from my neck on a quiet night at the diner, about the look on Ethan's face the first time he saw the brother he had lost reflected in mine, about the days in the penthouse, the nights at the estate, and finally about Michael's blessing. I kept his notebook inside a small wooden box placed on the highest shelf, a reminder of everything that had passed and of the value of choosing the right person at the right moment. We did not speak much about the future or make grand promises, but I knew one thing with certainty: the present was healing slowly in our hands. On many afternoons Ethan took me for walks around the lake. Our fingers intertwined beneath a pale blue sky as birds chirped on the branches above us. And those moments needed no words because the quiet peace in our hearts was enough to fill every space the past had left hollow. I no longer saw Michael in my dreams. But now and then, when sunlight streamed through the window on a winter morning, I felt as though he were smiling somewhere close. Not near, but not too far either. He was no longer a wound, but a fragment of the light that had guided me to this place. And I knew I had not looked back. Because for the first time, after everything, I was no longer living to remember, but living to truly live. One late spring morning, when the thin mist had not yet lifted, and the surface of the lake reflected the early sunlight like a vast mirror. Ethan and I sat on the long wooden bench on the porch, his hand resting lightly on mine. And we said nothing, only watched the ripples on the water as if the entire world was breathing in rhythm with us. And it was the kind of moment that needed no special event to be called happiness. We did not know what waited ahead. And honestly, we no longer felt the need to know, because after everything we had lived through, we understood that sometimes the most beautiful things do not lie in clear, perfect endings, but in the present moment where we choose to live fully with whatever still remains after the pain. A new life does not mean erasing the past, but learning to live alongside it with calm and gratitude. And Michael's notebook filled with his devotion, love, and sacrifice became my compass whenever I stood between choices, because he was the embodiment of loyalty. The one who dared stand with the light even when it cost him his life. And Ethan was the image of a man who seemed to have lost everything yet still knew when to stop in order to protect whatever remained. And I, a girl who once only knew how to wipe tables through endless night shifts, learned that any journey can change if we are brave enough to step out of our own fear. Perhaps life is like that, always leaving open doors we never expected. And some people enter our lives only long enough to teach us one lesson before they leave, while others arrive late but stay forever. And some losses that seem impossible to survive become the foundation for a gentler future. And it is from pain that we learn to love more deeply, to live more slowly, and to look at one another with greater compassion. If you are watching this video, I hope the story of Clare, Ethan, and Michael has touched some quiet place in your heart. Perhaps a memory, an unfinished love, or simply a reminder of something you once forgot in the rush of life. And I wonder how this story made you feel, whether it brought someone to mind, someone whose presence shaped you. And I invite you to share your truest thoughts in the comments below, because we always hope to hear from you from heart to heart. And if you feel that what we are creating has value, please subscribe to our channel, like this video, and share it with the people you care about. We will bring you more touching and meaningful stories every day. Stories that may make you smile, shed tears, or simply feel accompanied in this vast world. Thank you for staying with us until this moment, and may you always have good health, a peaceful life, joy in each day, and the quiet strength to find calm within your own soul. Goodbye, and we look forward to seeing you in the next.